A quick heads up. This episode includes discussion of suicide, violence, or other sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to CDP's podcast, Practical for Your Practice,
where we give you actionable intel to support what you do, one colleague to another. Hello, everybody, and welcome to CDP's Practical for Your Practice. I'm Dr. Carin, and I am joined today by my friend and co-host, Dr. Jenna Ermold. Jenna, how you doing today?
Hello, everyone. I am glad to be here and spending time with one of my two co-host besties.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm glad you're here too, because I got to admit, today we have a pretty powerful topic, a pretty personal topic to me, and I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't feeling a little bit nervous and a little bit of pressure about doing right by this episode. So I'm really glad to have you here as my emotional support co-host.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree it's a bit of a heavy one, but those are really important ones to have, and we'll already commend you for the bravery that it takes to be willing to host this episode.
Well, thanks. So, for our listeners who might not know why I'm feeling so anxious, it's because today we're going to be talking about survivors of suicide loss, which is a personal topic to me, and as I have come to learn, is a personal topic to many people who don't always talk about it publicly. And we're joined today with a guest for whom it is also a very personal topic, and we're really grateful to have him here with us. So I want to take a moment to introduce Andrew Devendorf. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
We're delighted to have you on this important topic. And perhaps we can get started by having you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them how you got here.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Andrew Devendorf. I'm a licensed psychologist who also works as a subject matter expert in suicide for the Henry Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. I am also an affiliate scholar of the University of Washington's School of Public Health in the Department of Health Systems and Population Health. And I, fortunately or unfortunately, have clinical experience, research experience, and personal experience with the topic today. For my research experience, I have four to four interconnected research programs. My position before this is I was working at the Seattle Puget Sound VA in veteran suicide prevention. I was actually awarded a grant to develop an intervention to help loved ones become more involved in mental health and suicide prevention efforts with veterans. Additionally, I've published a lot of articles on depression, mental illness stigma reduction, and actually leveraging lived experience as a strength for people who have mental health difficulties and even amongst professionals in the field. So it's really cool to be here talking about this topic with Carin and Jenna today.
Thank you so much for being here with us. And I appreciate that you have, unfortunately, both the professional and personal background in this area, um, which is really going to inform our discussion today, talking not only about the impact of being a survivor of suicide loss, but also hopefully talking a bit about the research of what we can do to support folks who are in this position.
Definitely.
So, how do we want to get started in talking about this topic? It's a big question. I guess I can get us started by saying that, as I've alluded to, if you don't already know, this is a personal topic for me because about 20 years ago next month, it'll be 20 years that my brother has died by suicide. And so that happened just as I was graduating from my clinical psychology program and becoming a full-fledged psychologist. And that's relevant because I think my experience in processing that and dealing with that was really complicated by all of the meanings that I carried around with that of, and I'll give you a hint what those were. I'm a psychologist. I should have seen this coming. I should have known what to do, etc.
Mm.
And it's taken me a long time to talk about it publicly for a bunch of reasons that we can talk about on the podcast. But I wrote about it in a blog about 10 years ago at this point and was shocked by the response that I got. And now, having worked with Andrew a little bit and us unfortunately being part of this club together that nobody wants to be a member of,
Right.
um, we have I have figured that maybe it's time to actually talk about it, not just write about it. So that's why I'm here, and how I kind of why I think this is an important topic.
Can I just have one follow on to
Of course.
when you first were brave enough to write a blog about it, you said you were shocked by the response. Can you share what was shocking? Because that could
Yeah,
be interpreted a few ways, and I have a feeling
fair.
it's really one way that you want it interpreted.
Fair. I appreciate that clarification. I was surprised because I very much felt like it was such a rare occurrence to be a
Hmm.
survivor of suicide loss, and very few people had talked with me about it.
Hmm.
And when I published the blog, I heard from acquaintances, I heard from casual friends, and I heard from coworkers who I was not very
Hmm.
close to. I got multiple emails and messages in that first week saying, "I'm so glad you wrote this. I dealt with this too." And it was so surprising
Yeah.
to hear how many people were in this club.
Thank you. I mean that's incredibly impactful. So I just wanted that reinforced.
Thank you.
And maybe Andrew, if you want to share what your experiences have been as well.
Yeah, so somewhat similar to Carin, I imagine that Carin, like many of us, enter this field because we have personal experiences in some way to this topic. So I lost my brother when I was 23 years old, and he was just 27 years old. Um, my brother Matt. He was my best friend. He was my icon. I like to describe him as somebody who made me a much better, more thoughtful, and more interesting person, given his sense of humor and him opening me up to, music and art and different ideas. Um, so I was uh, doing my post-bac training in psychology for in between a year of my undergrad and grad school. And actually, the week before he went missing, I was actually riding this high. I just accepted my offer to a PhD program in psychology, and
Mm,
I was really excited to start pursuing this career. I'd grown up with my own depression, seen my brother experience depression. I was really excited to start a career where I could learn evidence-based ways to combat this really difficult experience.
yeah.
Unfortunately, a week later, he went missing. And the way that we lost him, I won't go into full detail, but basically he went missing for a period of 6 weeks. And
Wow.
during that 6 week time, it had to be a very public experience, given, when somebody goes missing, you have to do everything that you can to find them. So advertising on the streets of Chicago, where I was living at the time, advertising social media. And so this experience that I think a lot of people unfortunately feel like they have to hide, I was actually put in a position where it was very publicized. Um, and so along the journey, there were a lot of supportive reactions. I would say about 90% of the reactions that people had, they were very supportive and helped me get through that experience. And because this is a topic that I think our society doesn't really talk about and people don't have a script for managing, there were a lot of really unhelpful reactions. And I think we'll probably talk about that today. Um, so kind of like Corinne, where she was graduating your program, I was starting my program, and
Mhm.
I also had these professional identity questions of, are people gonna judge me if I start working with somebody who has suicidal thoughts? Am I gonna be able to deal with that in the room? And I think we'll probably
Mhm.
talk about that later today.
Absolutely. I think though it's really kind of a nice segue, Andrew, and Corinne. Both of you, thank you again for sharing the two experiences. But this might be the good place to talk about what were some helpful things people said and what were some not so helpful things people said as things were sort of developing. And Corinne, yours was obviously, your paths are a little bit different, obviously,
Yeah.
given that your brother was missing for an extensive period of time and it was public. But Corinne, for those that the family chose to share this with, how did that how is that for you? Good and bad.
Oh, yeah. Um, Fortunately, right now I'm having a hard time remembering really negative
Mm,
reactions that we received or that I received from others. Probably if I had to like categorize them, they probably fell into the category of people just kind of giving platitudes, that weren't necessarily helpful at that time, but weren't mean-spirited. Things like, well, he's in a better place now, or
yeah.
value the time that you had together, or whatever,
Mhm.
which is all nice and good. Wasn't particularly helpful in that moment.
Right.
But the reality is people don't know what to say. It's a weird topic. So on the flip side, there were some friends because I had so many psychologist friends or friends who were in mental health. I feel like I got lucky in that a lot of the reactions were exactly what you might hope that they would be. People outright saying, I don't know what to say about this, but
Hmm.
I'm here for you. Um, if you want to talk about it or you don't want to talk about it, call me. And just kind of checking in. I had one friend who was also a psychologist, but clearly very uncomfortable with the whole situation. He like almost never mentioned it directly, but he got in this routine that he would call me every day at the same time because he knew like the month after it happened, I was off because I was working in college counseling at the time, so I had the summer off anyway. So my routine was like I would watch TV for X amount of time, and he knew what routine I was in. He would call me at the same time every day with some mundane topic of conversation that he
Hmm.
absolutely needed my input in that moment, or some errand that he had to run that he absolutely needed me to join me on. And it, like to this day, 20 years later, I remember how clearly he was uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but he did what he could to reach out, and that meant so much.
Those are such good examples. Andrew, how was that for you? Did you relate to some of what Corinne said, or what do you have to add?
Yeah, I think to relate some of the platitudes, I think that were well intentioned, they didn't land well. That said, I acknowledge, I think people are doing their best. I, I was actually my dentist at the time. I went in for a dental checkup, and when you're at the dentist, you can't say anything, and you're kind of stuck. And he was mentioning how sorry he was, and that was probably not the best time to do that.
Yeah, no, for
When my
sure.
mouth is open and he's cleaning my teeth, and there's a big light in your face.
That
But I
wasn't the
remember
most comfortable moment for you.
not the best moment. And I think he realized that as he was seeing me starting to tear up, and
Sure.
he was like, "I'm so sorry. It's just I didn't want to say nothing."
Right.
And
Mm,
I think
hmm.
that stuck with me of this is him trying to show that he sees me and that he wants to provide support. Um, so I want to start off with just like the supportive reactions because I really do want to give credit to my friends and family.
Yeah.
I was really fortunate at the time. I was dating someone and she was very supportive, and I kind of had her as a rock to help me through things. My coworkers were really supportive. I was a wreck while we were searching for my brother in the 6 weeks time that was going on, but also in the aftermath of after we had had the memorial and had some clarity about what happened. And what I mean by that is my coworkers allowed me to be at work. Um,
Hmm.
my life was so disrupted and felt so broken that going to work was some sense of normalcy and routine that I had that was familiar.
Hmm.
Um, and I wasn't very productive at work. My productivity was about cut in half, if not, even more than that. But they really picked up the slack, and they didn't judge me for it. They gave me time and space. Um, I was living with my brother at the time, which was again a dream. We had talked about living together for a while, but once he went missing, suddenly half the rent payment is gone.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and I feel like, there's a lot of crap people talk about property management companies, but in this situation, they actually just allowed me to just pay half the rent, and they just let that
Wow.
go.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Um, More like I think what everyday people could do, like I never in my life, and I hope I never experienced something like this, but I got so many treats sent to me. Cookies, cake,
So
Um,
many brownies, so many brownies. And I'm not
yes.
mad about it, but there were so many brownies.
Yeah, if anything, the problem was they weren't spread out over the long. I couldn't eat them
Right,
all at
Mm,
once.
right.
Um, so that was like super helpful. I think when people just took action without having
yeah,
to me to making me think in that situation where I'm like in this
yeah.
stress response mode. Now, transitioning to some of the unsupportive things, on the small end, I think people reaching out to me and asking, can they do something? For me, it was a little bit overwhelming to just get constant reminders that
Taxing, yeah.
Mhm.
your brother's missing and now
Hmm.
you have to make this decision. Like, are you okay with this person doing this thing? Um, more, some of the worst things that I experienced, again, because the way that he went missing was very public. A lot of people could have opinions about
Mm,
Hmm.
how my family was handling the search situation. So we had some family members who had some criticism or thoughts about were we doing enough to find my brother, or were we making sure we were checking all of our boxes?
yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, there were some people who were in somewhat of a denial of the reality that this could be the case, that he could have died by suicide. Um, some people who knew him who could never even imagine that my brother would do something like that. And so then they would tell us that and almost criticize us for like, why are we jumping to that worst conclusion?
Mm.
Um, and so I think it's like any suicide loss is a tragedy and a trauma in itself. But then it's like these added little like explosions around that you might have to
Hmm.
navigate behind the scenes that people aren't aware of. And so those were some of the things that worsened the experience for me.
I hate hearing that for so many
Mm,
reasons. Obviously, I hate that you and your family had to go through that. And and on like a bigger level, what I can really relate to in that is how much that feeds into the stigma that's
Hmm.
associated with suicide and with being a survivor of a suicide loss. Um, at least for me, I was constantly worrying about what do people think about me? What do they think about our family? What do they think about what happened or didn't happen?
Yeah.
And it's really disheartening to hear that some of those worries were maybe realistic and legitimate, and people were, to some extent, drawing conclusions, making assumptions about what did or didn't happen or what should or should not have happened.
Yeah, that's unfortunately a unique theme of suicide loss. It can happen out of nowhere, and it's so individualized where people just ask questions about what could have been done. Did people notice the signs? Um, People might feel like blame for it happening. Um, and so it was really tough to like you're saying, it's just like those are some of your worst thoughts, and people are saying those aloud, and that was not
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. And you have no chance of being able to say, like, oh, I'm just imagining it. It's probably not that bad because people are saying it out loud.
well, and I think it's the catch 22 um, of suicide prevention, right? So on the
Mhm.
one hand, it's terrifying because it can come out of the blue, and there are things like our field works so hard to find things that we can look at that are predictors or variables or things that we want to pay attention to, which is so important because we want to be in this, we want to take action and we want to prevent. But on the other hand, when you're on the other side of it, and I can only speak to this clinically. Unfortunately, I had a patient die by suicide,
Mhm.
and it was devastating. I mean, it was very devastating. And Carin's heard about this, but it was, a really difficult experience that happened to me in transition between internship and being on staff. Um, and there is this sort of culpability piece, right? Like, well, we know all these predictors, so where are they? What were you looking at? What weren't you looking at?
Mhm.
So not exactly similar to yours, but it's sort of this, like, again, all I can think of it is a catch 22. Like, we want to know what the predictors are, but at the same time, when it happens, we don't want to blame people for missing things or not seeing things. And so how do you navigate that, which I think just sort of continues to feed that stigma. Um, Any other thoughts on things that you experienced on the stigma front? I want to circle back to your in actionable intel. We'll circle back to what you just talked about is what was helpful and unhelpful because I think you gave some fabulous, very specific, concrete things. So we'll come back to that. But how did you deal with the stigma?
I think for me, um, it was I wasn't there originally, but so even after we had his memorial, because for me, I think the timeline's important. It was basically he was missing for 6 weeks, and until we had found him, we didn't know if we would ever find him. So I got some closure of uncertainty
Mm,
after the memorial. And so after that, I had these expectations for myself that like I should just like get back to work and get back to 100% functioning level.
mm,
Um, and even months after that, when I started my graduate program, so, and I think I really underplayed the experiences of stigma that I was almost sort of compartmentalizing. So like
mm,
when I was going through it, I was like, I can't pay attention to what these people are saying. This is
Hmm.
stupid. My focus is on being effective.
yeah.
But I think in the long term, after the experience that happened, I start processing some of those things. I start having like reminders of, oh my God, how am I going to present myself in this mental health program where I'm surrounded by mental health professionals, and they probably saw my Facebook statuses. Should
Mm,
I mention that I lost my
yeah.
brother to suicide? Should I talk
Mm.
about it? Should I hide it? What are the implications if I should or shouldn't? And so I somewhat avoided the topic for a while and I wasn't honest with myself. And so unfortunately, as we as psychologists know, when you avoid something and you hold things in and feel like you can deal with it, it will come out in some way.
Right.
And so there were some times where I had some, moments where the emotions came out and I couldn't hide it anymore. So I think dealing with the stigma, I got to this point of having to accept the situation, of how difficult it was, accepting that I wasn't going to get better overnight and that it was
Mm,
going to be a process. And then practicing that self-compassion of instead of expecting myself to perform in this PhD program at 100%, like I'm entering this program,
with tiny is
shell.
amazing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and as a professional, again, like people who enter psychology or other graduate programs, I think people are very high achieving and take a lot of pride in working really hard, being that perfect student, and I just couldn't do that. And so that's why I think dealing with the stigma itself came down to a lot of self-acceptance and compassion.
Which is definitely not easy. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about your process, Andrew, because I feel like although we're both survivors of suicide loss, our stories, and even though it was both of our brothers, our stories are significantly different.
Mhm.
Um, Yours was such a more public experience, whereas mine was much more private. And yet there's a lot of similarities between how I remember working through it or kind of being in it. So I had the luxury of being really private about it, and I really dug in to that initially. Like my bubble was very, very small in terms of people who knew about it. It's my closest friends, um, my coworkers, because, I had to take time off work, so they needed to know what happened, and my therapist. And that was really about it. And, it's and then that circle expanded, I guess, over time, but it expanded really slowly
Mm,
over time. And that notion of stigma is 100% what's been behind that slow change for sure. It hasn't been because I worry that I'm going to break down or because I value privacy all that much. It's much more about like, how do I test people out and how do I test out wh who I can trust with this. And it's frankly taken me 20 years to kind of talk about it so much more broadly. So to answer Jenna, your question of how do you deal with the stigma, for me, so much of it was like little steps at a time, really tiny steps, and protecting myself along the way.
mm. You both were in interesting places career-wise. Andrew, I can't imagine a more challenging time. Sorry, I'm not comparing you, but you headed into internship one, I mean, into your graduate program. if there's times in life when imposter syndrome is at its peak, I would say it's that, an internship, or like, probably actually also where you are, Corinne. Um, so I guess, what's the professional impact? How you've both mentioned some fears around that. How did it change your approach? I'm going to be honest and maybe, kind of throw out an odd thing it did for me, was my patient that I lost to suicide was during my Air Force time. And when I started at CDP, I firmly put my foot down and said, I will not do anything suicide prevention related. I want
Mm.
nothing to do with any of the trainings. You could put me on any other thing. I will talk about whatever, but I will not be on any suicide prevention. Now I'm now also 20 years more post and have flexed with that. But that was my way of protecting myself, was I don't even want to hear the S word,
Yeah.
which is um, not very logical given that I'm an exposure therapist, right? But so how did it impact you professionally? Hopefully, a little bit differently, it sounds like, than my reaction.
Yeah, so I was going into a lab that studied mostly depression, but also suicide was related to it. So from the research end, it was a little bit easier because it was natural exposure therapy.
Hmm.
As a researcher in suicide prevention, I always joke about, I think Google is very concerned with me because almost every day I have to Google something related to suicide.
Oh
Um,
no. But now you
and
add AI to that, you're really in trouble. Your algorithm.
Oh yeah. And so it became easier from a research standpoint of, there's this more academic shield and maybe
Mm,
emotional distance from it. But the reality was my passion and what I viewed as my purpose at that point was to help prevent this from happening to other people. And so as a clinician, I wanted to help people who are having suicidal thoughts. But that was really tough for me in the first 3, 4 years of my graduate training.
mm,
I remember there was a time where we were practicing suicide risk assessment within our cohort, and we were just going around a circle asking people what were some signs of suicide. And during that time, I kind of broke down and just started crying in the room when I was playing the clinician, because then it started having some of those trauma memories related to it. So it was a process. The good news is, I think in a training program, it actually was a protective environment. My
yeah.
supervisors were pretty supportive. An actionable thing that they did is I think they let me go at my own pace, but they also didn't deny me opportunities.
Yeah.
Um, and that was again some of the like ways to combat stigma. They were happy to support me in seeing the patients I want to see, and also were mindful that, if I took on an at-risk suicide client, it could be more difficult. Um, I would say up until even my internship, there were still cases when I was working in the PTSD clinic. A lot of veterans, unfortunately, know people who they lost their friends to suicide.
Hmm.
And if that was their primary index trauma, I would stay away from that. Um, but I think I'm still taking steps almost like year by year still of just trying to expose myself to that, because this is a topic that, um, Corinne, let me know if you feel like this, but I feel like, as somebody who's in the research part of it, the clinical part of it, and now has the lived experience, there are so few people who have that kind of, you know, tripartite experience, and to be able to talk about it from the different lenses.
Yeah.
Um, Corinne, how do you feel about this, the blend between your professional and your personal experience?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It you can't disconnect those, right? Like for us,
Yeah.
they can't be disconnected. I can't just like shut down the personal side of things or shut down the professional side of things. They're merged and they're blended, and there's no way around that. So similar to you, Andrew, I feel like it's again just been an evolution for me in terms of kind of how I've balanced the professional with the personal. And similarly, immediately after my brother's suicide, I um, came back to work and I was actively in clinical work. And kid you not, my very first client back was a grief client because she had just lost her grandmother. So
Mm.
now,
Mm,
granted, a very different scenario, but like just immersed right in grief. my first day back. But that was okay. But I knew that I couldn't work with people who had a lot of thoughts about suicide at the moment. I certainly couldn't work with survivors of suicide at that moment. And then with time, my ability to do more of that has shifted. My ability certainly to manage my own emotional reactions has gotten better. But interestingly, Jenna, I'm still at the same point that you are, that
Mm,
I will not work on suicide prevention directly at CDP. Obviously, again,
yeah,
you can't disconnect it. It's merged in everything that we do. I
sure.
work with trauma. Um, there's no way that I can just not work with folks who think about suicide, but I cannot be on the formal suicide prevention team. I don't think I can handle it. So that's still a limit for me, and I'm comfortable knowing that I have a limit, which has been important.
That makes sense, and honestly makes me feel a little bit better because I think there's kind of two directions. I mean, like Andrew, you leaned into it, right? You took your experience and wanted to, use that to really enhance what we know about management of depression and suicide prevention. And I think, and Corinne and I sort of went this other direction of like, I want to do all these other related things, but I can't hit it head on. And that's, I think that's perfectly fine, whichever direction you choose. As you both have, this season, not one of our sort of theme, if you will, or what we want to make sure we bring stories in, which we've already really brought some good stories
Mhm.
in, are about impactful moments in our career. And I wonder if you could both maybe sort of was there a time or a moment or sort of a part of this story that was that impactful moment that really kind of shaped you and how you approach this topic or your work in general, that you can think on in this sort of journey that you've both been taking in suicide survivorship?
It's funny because when we were prepping for this episode, I thought that was going to be a very ridiculous question because obviously the impactful moment is what we've been talking about this whole time, right? We both
Yeah.
survived the suicide of a loved one. Like, duh, that's the impactful moment. But I'm laughing because actually, as we've gone through this discussion, I realized that in fact there's been many impactful moments about this whole journey. And for me, I'll just come back to that response that I got that was wholly unexpected when I posted my blog about this and heard back from all these other people who had been affected, who I had no idea about. And I was so glad that we now had this connection and we were talking about it. That that was a hugely impactful moment for me, and that's now going on 10 years ago.
Amazing. How about you, Andrew?
Yeah, I hate to somewhat echo Carin's impactful moment, but I also wrote about losing my brother to suicide publicly. It was published in the Huffington Post in 2019. And Carin, I really identify. I was shocked by how many people reached out to me and just thanked me for being open about this topic, and made these connections. And if you think about it, suicide is a topic where people feel like they have to conceal that experience, or a lot of people do. Um, and so it was moving that strangers connected with that article for such an
Mm,
individualized experience that varies from person to person, but they still felt um, connected enough to like reach out. That was impactful for me because, again, I was in this clinical science Ph.D. program where the focus was on developing academic research. And that moment of sharing that article told me that, oh, wow, we need to really implement this research more. We need to spread this because people aren't talking about it. And there's a lot of power and value in um, almost shifting how we talk about it too. Like, I don't think we should
mhm.
just talk about it and just say it. I think there's better and worse ways to go about this. Um, that was probably my impactful moment too. I'm sorry that it's so similar to Corinne's, but I wonder
You
if
don't need
that
to be sorry. Yeah.
underlines the theme
Yeah,
of like this.
exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, with like suicide, you might feel like you have to conceal it, and actually sharing the story allows for connection and education for other people. So,
And I imagine there are many listeners, or at least one out there who, heard this experience for both of you, and maybe really opened up something for them, if they have also been a survivor of someone dying by suicide. So I feel like you're carrying that torch on via this medium as well. So writing about it was the first step, and now doing a podcast as a second. Again, just want to stop and thank both of you for being willing to do that.
And
Um,
not to be too nerdy about it, but there is some research that suggests that for every completed suicide, 6 people are affected intimately by it, and over 100 people are more broadly affected by it. So
mm,
even though it has felt very lonely at times, or felt like I must be the only one, or there must be so few people, when you compute those numbers, it's not surprising that so many people are suffering alone. There's so many people out there, so many more than you might realize. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. And that, I guess, probably leads us into actionable intel.
Incoming actionable intel.
love it. Love it.
Yeah. Well,
So
can I add on to Corinne's
please.
point too?
Yes.
Because it's not just people who die by suicide, which is about 40 to 50,000 people a year, plus all the people they knew. Each year there's over 1 million suicide attempts.
Hmm.
That itself can just be devastating to a person, family, and other people. And so this topic is again something that is more prevalent and pervasive than I think people are aware of, and I think people maybe have this idea like I don't need to think about it until it happens, or they're not even aware about it. And it's not like anything ill-willed, but when you don't talk about something, you can't know about something. And so I think that's what we're trying to do on this podcast of just starting the conversation.
So actionable item number one, I guess, is to continue to have the conversation. If this
Hmm.
conversation has been relevant to you in some way and you haven't had a conversation about it yet, maybe it's time to think about how to do that, how to reach out to somebody who you trust, how to reach out to an organization that can support you. And if you've already started the conversation, please continue because apparently there are a lot of us who can be involved in this conversation. So that's actionable item number one, I guess. Keep talking.
Yeah, I think one action item for suicide loss survivors, people who go through this tragedy, is kind of understanding your needs and expressing them, and also practicing boundaries in the sense of like if you need help, reach out for it. But also if you anticipate that other people in your life, you're kind of worried about what they think or if they might say something wrong, kind of express the type of support that you want. Unfortunately, that puts the burden on the person going through the loss. But
Hmm.
I think from my experience, when I didn't do that, that's when I got a bunch of things that were unhelpful.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's kind of what I mean by just clarifying your needs. And nobody has to have everything figured out right away. But
Too many brownies and not enough cake,
yes,
Not enough
clarify
milk,
what desserts you want.
perhaps.
right?
I would have preferred ice cream cake. I know it would have been a
It would
hassle
have
to send through
melted.
mail, but
Yeah.
I'm just thinking maybe some protein items would have been good in there as well.
I
But
need,
I think that goes back to what you said is, if you know someone who has lost someone to suicide and you're trying to figure out ways to support them, it can be, think about this idea that they're trying to compartmentalize things a little bit so they can kind of get on with what they're doing and have some sense of control. And when you're kind of in with good intentions, kind of poking, how are you doing? What can I do? It's a sort of balance between like what's the best way? How best can I support you? What's working, what's not working. I'd like to bring you dinner. Would that be good for you? But not asking. It's sort of a fine line. Like you want to support them without having to ask too many questions, but you want to do it in a manner that's going to be most helpful to them.
yeah, it's tough, but I think people can get there and have gotten there. It's kind of like showing that you're leaving the door open
Hmm.
and being inviting, but also not pressuring.
Yeah. And I loved what you also said about how you found some relief by just being able to have a schedule and go to work. So
Mhm.
don't make assumptions about what somebody isn't going, is or isn't going to be helpful for them. So for some people,
Mm-hmm.
being able to show up and walk through a day is actually a little bit restorative and helpful versus sitting home alone cogitating about this or so that to me was impactful too. Like how I'm thinking about as a supervisor, how would I support somebody? There's lots of different places there. What about resources? We haven't really talked about that. Did either of you, in terms of our actionable intel, were there resources for survivors of suicide that we could link in the show notes or that you're aware of?
Yeah, so one resource that I recommend to people is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They have a lot of information, facts, and resources and links to help people who either somebody has suicidal thoughts or also survivors of suicide loss. Another helpful organization is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is similar with just their resources and knowledge that they have available.
We'll link both of those in the show notes for any of you'd like to check them out.
I'll also link the blogs that we wrote. I had the liberty of reading Andrew's blogs on that he wrote previously, and I thought they were excellent and really moving. So I'd like to link those in the resources as well. And we'll do a little promotion of CDP blogs and link mine as well, which was published through CDP.
Same to you, Carin. You are an excellent writer, and it was moving. And I think one thing that, we're not going to start something new, but it was helpful to me to connect with Carin as a survivor of sibling loss in this topic. I think you're the first other sibling who I've talked to about this, and so this has been therapeutic for me just on this podcast to connect with you. So thanks so much for having me and being open to this conversation.
I'm glad. It's like another little subset of this weird club. Siblings are their own little unique sub club.
Yeah.
That
We
have
don't
their
want
own
anyone
thing.
in our club, by the way. This
Yeah,
is
let's just make it the two of us. That's it. Nobody else come in. It's terrible here.
Yeah.
Truly, thank you, Andrew, for this conversation. This has been really moving. I hope that listeners have found it helpful. I hope that if you are listening and this conversation has resonated with you, that you reach out, that you let us know that it impacted you, but more importantly, that you reach out to people who can support you and keep this conversation going instead of being isolated with it. So thank you, Andrew, for being our guest. Thank you, Jenna, for being our rock on this episode.
Well, I am always impressed. I have known Carin for a very long time, and she is an incredibly impressive colleague. And Andrew, I am so glad that we will have the opportunity to connect more, and what a value you bring to our organization in the field. So thank you both. And we will look forward to hearing hopefully from our listeners, and certainly hope that you tune in again.
And until the next episode, stay curious
and mind your EBPs.
Bye,
Thanks, everybody.
Be sure to subscribe to Practical for Your Practice to be notified when new episodes arrive. Our theme music is Failed Attempts by Nitro, and our administrative assistant is Bree Mercer. This podcast is produced by CDP at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of War, or the U.S. government. In addition, references to any specific companies, products, processes, or services does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of War, or the U.S. government.